Hey, we're back talking about house of worship, what it means to be the church in our world today. And I hope that this encourages you. I hope it encourages all of us to take some steps closer together and to connect more deeply with each other. So today we're talking about the issue of mission and some really important things to embrace and understand today. So let's just dive right in. Let's begin by saying this. When we talk about being the church, we are not necessarily talking about going to church. Although I think going to church can be helpful, but that's not what it means to be the church. Being the church is about being about God's business, God's mission. It's about bringing light to the world. It's about being light in the world. Let's think about communion for a second. And if you join us on Sunday, we're going to do communion together so that we can kind of envision this together. But Jesus said this in Luke. He took some bread and gave thanks to God for it. Then he broke it in pieces and gave it to the disciples, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me." Now I want you to think about Jesus' body. Jesus broke his body and shared it with the world. He gave his life, but he symbolized in communion, the Last Supper, he symbolized a loaf of bread being broken and shared and given to the disciples who would represent believers, all believers that would come from them. And so Jesus broke his body and gave it to everyone else. Now think about this passage in Ephesians. The church is his body. It is made full and complete by Christ, who fills all things everywhere with himself. Wow. So Christ broke his body and gave it to the world. And we, as believers, are Christ's body. What makes us think that he stopped breaking his body and giving it to the world? Doesn't it make sense that he continues to break his body and share it in every place that is dark, no matter how small or large? Doesn't it make sense that Jesus continues to send his body into all of those places? So let's begin there. Let's begin with the image of communion, but not with the image of a wafer that we get out of a package, but a loaf of bread that is broken and shared with all and given to all. And let's understand that greatly and perfectly captures the mission of the church and how Jesus sends his church out. Now, if you don't like that picture, I want to remind you this. The church belongs to Jesus. That is something we have to understand. The church was his idea. He instituted it. He picked the word that we now call church. In the Greek was ecclesia. It meant a called out assembly. Actually, it meant called out for a purpose, whether that purpose was discussion or what have you. It's a pretty general term, but he's the one who took it and used it to describe those who would follow him. Okay? And so Jesus is the one who gets to say what church is, not us. Church will never be about us. And that's what the church in America, the church in the West, and the church around the world must understand. The church can never be about us. It cannot be marketed like businesses in the world. It cannot be approached in that way. The church is the body of Jesus. He owns it. He claims it. He defines it. Anytime we begin to define church in the way that we want it, we're claiming authority over Jesus. And no one wants to do that. He's the one who died for the church. He's the one who paid for it. Now, I know I'm belaboring the point, but I just want to make it clear. Jesus owns the church, died for the church, coming back for the church. He gets to say what church is and how church works and functions. Now, church Jesus' way is powerful. That's something we need to realize. That when we feel like our churches are weak or watered down or cowardly or afraid or whatever we think and accusations we may lay against Jesus' church, which we really don't have a right to do, by the way. But whatever those accusations are, we need to understand that Jesus' church, Jesus' way, is powerful. Jesus said this to Peter, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." You got to understand, nothing's going to stop the church. She's going to accomplish her purpose and her mission. Jesus is going to make sure of that. Even the gates of hell cannot withstand the advance of the church. And that's how you need to see it. You need to see that hell is like a prison. The gates of hell are like the ideas, the beliefs, and the torments and the poverty and all these things that capture and enslave people around the world. But the church, who Jesus has called out and called into action, called to do something, when she advances against that oppression, that blindness, that lostness, that captivity, the gates of hell cannot withstand the forward advance of the church. The church is powerful. She will win. She will accomplish Jesus' purpose. There's no doubt about that. The church is powerful when the church operates in Jesus' way, which she does because Jesus is taking responsibility for the church. So the church is powerful. The church is also on a mission. And what is that mission? That mission is not to get a lot of people in seats. It's not to have great programs. That mission is displayed clearly in Ephesians 3:10. Here's Paul's writing, a very deep, profound letter, obviously born out of a lot of reflection for Paul. He says God's purpose in all this was to use the church to display his wisdom in its rich variety to all the unseen rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. The church is here to display the wisdom of God, to show demons, demon princes, evil, high spirits, the wisdom, the goodness, the mercy, the kindness, the compassion, the strength, the justice of God, to glorify God. That's what we're here to do. Now, how that looks and what that begins to take shape of, I don't know, but it amazes me that what God is doing with a bunch of natural, ordinary people is he's teaching these supernatural beings all about supernatural things through us. It strikes me as an irony that they only know the supernatural realm, or they were created knowing that realm, and God's using us to teach them supernatural truth through the church. Crazy. But that's the mission, to glorify and proclaim God in his wisdom, and to bring God and the light of God into every dark corner of the world. Paul said in Philippians 2:15 that you will shine among them like stars in the sky as you hold firmly to the word of life. Imagine, if you will, this is the beginning of the year, but Christmas was not too long ago. Imagine a string of Christmas lights. Now, I know Christmas lights have gotten better over the years, but they used to really drive you crazy. So you'd have a string of Christmas lights, and if it was more than 10 minutes old, a light would be burned out. And sometimes, and often as they used to be, if one light was out, the whole string would be out. Or even more infuriating, half the string would be out. Imagine the church is filled with lights. Some of those lights are flickering. Some of those lights are red and blue and white. Some of those lights are out. Maybe half the string's out. Now, if you were decorating your house for Christmas and you started pulling out those strings, and rather than trying to fix all the lights, what if you just used them? You know what would happen? The more lights you put up, the more strings you used, what would happen is that all the lights would shine together. And in shining together, you would never notice the lights that weren't shining. And the interesting thing will be that whether the lights were shining or not, because they were with all of the other lights, people would drive by with their kids in the car, greatly excited about Christmas, and whether they meant to or not, they would celebrate the coming of Christ because of all these lights that are strung together. Now, Jesus used a different metaphor. He used the vine. I like to think that if he were around today and the world had known about Christmas lights, he might have used that one. I don't know. I do know this, that as we embrace Christ and we root in Christ and we pursue Christ, as we magnify Christ, as we look for Christ, as we celebrate what Christ is doing in our world and in our lives, we shine. And maybe by ourselves, we're just a twinkling little Christmas light. But God did not intend for us to be a light by ourselves. He intended us to shine with others. And that's a house of worship. Whether that's the house you live in, whether that's a gathering that meets on a day of the week or several days of the week, that's a house of worship. That's what we're here to be.